In 1973, a Vermont family walked into Sunday Mass and was never seen again. No one saw them leave. No car, no footprints, just 5 empty seats in the 11th pew. 50 years later, a priest hears someone harmonizing with a hymn he's singing alone. The pew remains empty. The hymnal keeps returning, always open to the same page. And when he finally sings the last verse, the church remembers what it buried. Before watching, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting mysteries and untold stories. The wind moved like breath through the cracked stained glass of St. Harlan's Church, carrying the scent of old wood, melted wax, and something colder beneath it, like wet stone or unearthed memory. Father Thomas Delaney stood at the entrance of the nave, silent beneath the echo of his own steps. The doors creaked closed behind him, their sound swallowed by the stillness that had defined this place for decades. The pews stretched forward like rows of ribs, sun-bleached and polished from generations of prayer. Dust hovered like holy mist in the pale morning light. It was Sunday. There would be no congregation, only him and the memory of one. St. Harlan's had not hosted a full service since 1973, the year an entire family vanished during Mass. No wreckage, no sign of departure, no blood. No sound, just a missing row of parishioners who had come to worship and simply disappeared. The youngest child was only 6. The family had sat in the 11th pew, 3rd row from the back on the left side, the only pew in the entire church where the varnish never dulled, where the air never quite warmed, where, despite repairs and refinishing, the wood still creaked under no weight at all. Father Delaney had come to catalog the site for the diocese archives. St. Harlan's was scheduled for deconsecration and potential sale. He had volunteered, not because he believed in ghosts, but because he knew grief had weight, and someone needed to carry it properly. But today, something was different. He hadn't placed a hymnal in the 11th pew. He never did. Yet there it was now, black leather, cracked spine, lying open as if someone had just set it down and forgotten it. He walked down the center aisle, shoes clicking softly on stone, until he stood beside it. The book was open to page 237. Come, O fount of every blessing. The very hymn that had closed the morning service 50 years ago, the one they had sung before they disappeared. He stared at the page. The notes seemed to shift as he watched them, a trick of light or tired eyes. But he'd heard stories, old ones, stories whispered among the older clergy over weak coffee and too many funerals. The hymn sings back. He scoffed softly at his own nerves. Nonsense, he whispered. Still, he sat down. He hadn't intended to. But the wood beneath him creaked, not with decay, but memory. He felt the seat flex, just slightly, as if someone had sat beside him. His breath caught. You're tired, he told himself. That's all. He looked at the hymnal again. His voice was quiet when he began to sing. Come, O fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. It wasn't a strong voice, but it was enough. The notes hung in the empty air, trembling like old glass. And then another voice joined him, software high, fragile, female, singing harmony just half a beat behind. He froze mid-note. The harmony stopped too. He turned. The pew behind him was empty, but the air was warmer. The dust had shifted. The hairs on his arms stood like antennae. A sudden gust rattled the stained glass high above the altar, and one small shard of red glass tumbled down and shattered near the pulpit. And in the brief silence that followed, he heard, faint but undeniable, a child's laughter from somewhere deeper in the church. Not cruel, not mocking, just lost. The church had no electricity anymore, not since the storm 3 winters ago had blown out the lines, and the diocese never bothered to repair them. Father Thomas Delaney worked by lantern light. the flame flickering against the worn pages of the sacristy register like a heartbeat. He turned the pages slowly, reverently. The pages smelled of mildew and incense and time. Each entry was handwritten in ink that had faded to rust. Weddings, baptisms, funerals, attendance logs, hymn selections, and there, March 4th, 1973, the last full service ever held at St. Harlan's. His finger traced the names, his breath catching as he came to the McKennas. Father, mother, 3 children, all signed in perfect penmanship by the elder son, Elijah McKenna, a boy of barely 16, with a steady hand. 5 in total, Delaney whispered aloud. The notes beside the name, written in the same careful script by the presiding priest, Father Harold Grayson, read simply, "Seated 11th pew, left side. Sang final hymn. No exit noted. No exit noted." He sat back in the wooden chair. It creaked loudly in protest. That line had haunted diocesan records for years. Investigators had come, state police, church inquiry, even a psychologist. None could make sense of it. The McKennas came in. The McKennas never left. No bodies, no footprints, no forced doors, no blood, not even a coat forgotten behind. Only the hymnal, open to page 237, and a silence that had lingered like a second presence in the church ever since. Delaney closed the register gently and sat still for a long while. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees that had long since reclaimed the surrounding cemetery. The stones out there were cracked and crooked, like teeth in a forgotten mouth. He stood and carried the lantern out into the nave again. The pews were waiting, watching. His eyes scanned the rows, then settled on the 11th. The hymnal was gone. He blinked. It had been there an hour ago. Open, page 237. Now the pew was empty. His skin chilled beneath his collar. Slowly, he walked down the aisle again, steps measured, heart racing. He reached the 11th pew and bent down, hand brushing the polished wood. Still warm. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed from the back of the church. A single note. Clear. Hollow. It had come from the organ. But the organ hadn't worked since the 80s. The bellows were rotted. The keys yellowed like old teeth. He had inspected it himself just days ago. And yet, one key had sung. He turned, lantern raised, casting long shadows against the walls. "Hello?" His voice cracked slightly. Nothing. He moved toward the organ, past the altar. His shoes clicked on the stone floor, echoing too loudly for a place so empty. Or perhaps not so empty. The organ bench was empty. The keys untouched, but one note was still softly vibrating. Middle C. He pressed it. Silence. But beside the organ, tucked behind the choir railing, lay something he hadn't noticed before. A pair of black leather shoes. Child-sized, polished, as if for church. His breath caught. He knelt slowly, touching the shoes with the tips of his fingers. Cold. Real. And then he noticed a single white sock, folded and placed carefully on the organ bench. Too deliberate to be lost. Too fresh to be from 1973. The flame inside Father Delaney's lantern shifted as if caught by breath, though no wind stirred the air. He remained kneeling before the child's shoes for a long moment, his mind drifting through layers of disbelief, logic, and a final, quieter feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't awe. It was something colder. Recognition. He stood slowly, the weight of his cassock suddenly heavier, and moved the lantern's glow toward the rear panel of the organ, the section that backed against the far wall of the sanctuary. The panel was older than the rest of the instrument. Different wood. Less wear. Something about it felt like it had been replaced or added. Behind the organ was a narrow door. He hadn't seen it before, because it hadn't been there. The wood was flush against the wall, painted the same pale ash gray as the surrounding stone. It was only visible now because the edge of it was slightly ajar. The crack too clean, the gap too recent. Delaney approached slowly. His breathing had shallowed. He placed a hand on the door. It was warm. Not just warmer than stone, warm like skin, like breath, like waiting. He pushed. The door opened without a sound. Inside, darkness, but not empty. He lifted the lantern and stepped in. The space beyond was narrow, like a hidden vestry or storage corridor, barely wider than his shoulders. Wooden shelves lined the walls, dusty and bare except for a few scattered hymnals, a cracked chalice, and a small statue of the Virgin with no eyes. He passed the shelves, moving deeper. The walls were lined with peeling plaster and faint handprints, children's handprints, pressed into the paint like smudged prayers. Then he heard it again. Music, very faint. From the far end of the corridor, someone was humming. "Come, O fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." The same hymn, a girl's voice, young, pure, untrained. He followed the sound through the corridor's curve until he reached a second door, this one older, iron-framed, its hinges ancient and blackened with rust. The singing stopped. He placed a hand on the doorknob, cold this time. He hesitated. Behind him, something creaked. He turned fast, raising the lantern. No one. The corridor was empty. The door back to the sanctuary? Closed. His hand trembled now. It was open before. He pressed the iron knob and opened the second door. Beyond it, there was only stone steps, leading downward, swallowed in shadow. He shouldn't go. He knew that. There were protocols, precautions. His cell phone had no signal in these walls, and even if it did, who would he call? Who would believe? He stepped down. Each footfall echoed too long, as if the space beneath the church was wider than it should be, deeper. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened into a small stone room, circular and vaulted, lit by a single rusted oil lamp in the wall. And in the center of the room, sitting on a wooden pew too small for adults, was a girl. She wore a pale church dress, white shoes, no socks. Her hair was braided. She looked no older than 8. Her back was to him. She was humming. The hymn. The hymnal lay open in her lap. "Hello?" he asked softly. The girl did not turn. Instead, she spoke, her voice high, flat, and certain. "You're not supposed to hear it." "What?" "Only the ones who stayed can hear it. You left. They didn't." Delaney stepped forward slowly. Are you one of the McKennas?" The girl did not answer. Instead, she closed the hymnal and set it gently beside her. "When the hymn ends, the door closes," she said. "What door?" She pointed to the ceiling. He looked up. There was no ceiling, just darkness. And above it, the faint sound of a church bell, distant and impossibly far away. He turned back to her, but the bench was empty. She was gone. Only the hymnal remained. Page 237, Street, Harlan's Church, March 4th, 1973. The bell rang out once, clear and deliberate, over the frost-bitten hills of Vermont. It was the kind of cold that clung low to the ground, threading through stone foundations and chapel wood alike. Ice still gripped the edges of the cemetery fence, even though the sun had risen. The McKennas arrived exactly at 9:42 a.m. Their Dodge station wagon pulled into the gravel lot with the familiar crunch of tired tires. The car door opened. 5 pairs of polished shoes stepped out. Black leather for the father, dark brown for the eldest son, scuffed white Mary Janes for the youngest. Margaret McKenna was the last to exit the car, her gloved hand gently smoothing the youngest daughter's hair. The girl, Sarah, only 6, squinted up toward the chapel's roof and blinked at the crucifix mounted above the entrance. "Mama," she said quietly, "why's Jesus looking away today?" Margaret paused. "He's not, sweetheart. It's just the light." But she looked anyway, and for a moment, even she felt it. The way the eyes on the old stone figure seemed turned just slightly, not down toward the faithful, but off toward the trees, as if listening for something. They filed inside, coats unbuttoned against the warmth of incense and candlelight. The church was modest. 40 pews, a small altar, wood-framed stations of the cross nailed along the walls like wounds that had faded but never closed. They took their usual place, the 11th pew on the left, 3rd row from the back. They always sat there, never closer, never farther. To anyone watching, they were the picture of American Catholic devotion. William McKenna was a mailman, quiet, strong-backed, known in the town for delivering Christmas cards by hand even after hours. Margaret played piano at the local high school. Elijah, the eldest, was set to graduate that spring. Samuel, the middle child, hardly spoke. And Sarah, the youngest, liked to hum when she thought no one was listening. On this morning, the children were unusually quiet, not out of fear, but something like expectation. At the pulpit, Father Harold Grayson adjusted his stole, hands trembling slightly from arthritis. He had preached at St. Harlan's for 31 years and had married or buried nearly everyone who now filled the pews. He noticed the McKennas, of course. He always did. They never missed a Sunday. He also noticed the way Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder, and how Elijah hadn't opened his hymnal. The service progressed like any other, readings, responses, kneeling and rising in rhythm. It wasn't until the offertory that something odd happened. The bell rang again. Once. Sharp, everyone turned, but the bell tower door was shut. Father Grayson frowned. That wasn't possible. The bell hadn't been rung manually in months. Its rope had rotted and broken just after Epiphany. Still, he cleared his throat and moved on. Then came the homily. He spoke of grace, of burden, of how the Lord does not always remove hardship but walks through it with us. A message born more of weariness than conviction. Then the final hymn was announced. Hymn number 237, he said. Come, O fount of every blessing. Heads bowed, pages turned, voices rose. The McKennas sang. Come, O fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Sarah's voice was light, barely audible, but she was smiling. The final verse echoed through the rafters, then faded into stillness. Father Grayson closed his book. Go in peace, he said. The Mass is ended. The congregation rose, coats were gathered, smiles exchanged. But when Father Grayson turned back to the altar to offer the closing prayer, a man stepped up beside him and whispered in his ear, Father, the McKennas, they're gone. Grayson turned. The pew was empty, books still in place, gloves left folded on the bench, but no one there. Not in the pew, not in the vestibule, not in the lot. Not on the road. The family that had arrived just 1 hour earlier was gone. Present day. St. Harlan's Church. The hymnal sat on the bench exactly where she had left it. But the girl was gone. Father Delaney stood motionless in the center of the underground chamber, the small pool of lantern light doing little to comfort the darkness that clung to the walls. Shadows bent oddly here. Angles felt wrong. It wasn't just a room. It was a wound cut beneath the church, and it hadn't healed. He reached for the hymnal. His fingers brushed the worn leather cover, cold despite the heat of his palm. The pages fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze. He opened it, not to page 237 this time, but to the title page. It had a name inside, written in neat cursive, faded to a faint rust color. Sarah McKenna. He closed his eyes. The girl. It had to be. The youngest of the 5. She's dead, he whispered. She's been gone for 50 years. But the hymnal disagreed. It was warm again now, as if passed from living hands. He opened it again. Page 237. The notes on the page almost hummed with quiet presence. "Come, O fount." No, not now. He wouldn't sing again. Not here. Delaney backed away from the bench, careful not to disturb anything, and turned toward the steps. They were gone. The stairs had vanished. Where there had been stone and iron rungs moments ago, now there was only a wall, seamless, as if it had never held a door at all. Panic thudded low in his chest. He tapped the wall, solid, cold. Not a sound returned. He was entombed, but then humming, not distant this time, not ghost-like, right behind him. He turned. The girl was back, standing in the same place, but facing him now. Her eyes were pale gray, almost silver, and too old for her face. Her expression was unreadable, neither childlike nor cruel, just present. "Did you hear the bell?" she asked. Delaney nodded slowly. "Why did it ring?" She tilted her head. "Because someone opened the book." She stepped forward. Her shoes made no sound. Not even the wooden bench creaked. "Do you remember what comes next?" He shook his head. "I don't understand. Why are you here?" "Because he sang it wrong," she said softly. "Who?" The girl didn't answer. She stepped toward the wall where the stairs had been and touched her palm to the stone. A warmth spread from her hand. A faint circle of light glowed beneath it, like an ember slowly breathing. "You should leave." "I would if I could." "Then don't finish the hymn." And then she was gone again. No flicker, no blink. Just vanished. The glow on the wall faded, and Delaney was alone once more. He stepped back toward the bench, unsure if he was moving toward understanding or madness. He didn't sing, but he did hum, softly, almost involuntarily. Just a few bars, and something above him answered. The organ. It played the melody back, note for note. He hadn't touched it. He was underground. The organ was upstairs. But it played anyway, hollow, breathy, like it was remembering. He reached for the hymnal once more. The page was blank, every note, every word, gone, as if never written. Only the title remained, For the Ones Who Stayed. Present day. Parish House Office, St. Harlan's Father. Delaney did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the small desk in the rectory office, surrounded by file boxes, crumbling logbooks, and brittle sacristy ledgers. The oil lamp hissed softly beside him, casting long shadows across old parish records. Outside, the wind had picked up again, the trees bent, as if bowing. He had spent hours combing through documents with trembling hands. There were gaps in the records, not just pages missing, but names. Whole years where the parish register jumped ahead, as if someone had torn out the time between. Baptismal records stopped abruptly in 1973. Confirmation rosters listed dozens of children but never included the McKennas. And in the old choir log, the family's name appeared only once. March 4th, 1973. Marked with a faded red ink. Final voices added. Sound complete. Delaney ran a hand down his face, feeling the dry rasp of stubble. He hadn't eaten, hadn't changed clothes. His fingers were stained with old ink and candle soot. The church creaked. He turned. Nothing. Just silence. Thick and familiar now. He stood and walked to the bookshelf behind the desk, scanning its titles. Liturgical manuals, local history, sermon anthologies from the 1940s. One spine caught his eye. St. Harlan's Parish Journal, private. No author, no date, just handwritten lettering on a leather-bound book. He pulled it out. Inside were loose entries, written in the same hand, elegant, controlled, but hurried near the end. The final author was clearly Father Grayson, the priest who had overseen the church when the McKennas disappeared. Delaney flipped to the final entry. March 5th, 1973. I heard the harmony again last night. It wasn't the wind. It never is. I opened the sacristy. The pew was still warm, and the hymnal open as before. Always 237. I should tell the bishop, but I know what they'll say. We must not speak of miracles we cannot explain. Not after the others, not after Mercy Rock. But this isn't a miracle. This is a door, and we opened it with our voices. The boy came to me in a dream. Elijah, he said, we didn't leave, Father. We just stayed behind. What does that mean? And why, when I sing the final verse alone, does the pew behind me creak? Delaney closed the journal and exhaled sharply. The handwriting in that last paragraph had changed, uneven, shaky, almost as if written by a different hand. He turned the page. Blank. He closed the book slowly, holding it in both hands. What was happening here? Why the McKennas? Why this church? Why him? He had volunteered for this post as a formality. The church was to be deconsecrated. His job was to archive the documents, close the file, and prepare for demolition or sale. And yet here he was, speaking to ghosts, hearing music from broken organs, finding shoes that didn't decay, and hymns that sang back. He sat again, more carefully this time, folded his hands, and prayed. Lord, if I'm losing my mind, let it be for your glory. If I'm being tested, let me know what for. And if they're still here, the McKennas, if they're still waiting in that pew, then show me why you left the door open. A soft knock broke the silence. It came from the hallway. 3 slow taps, not forceful, not urgent, just present. He stood, heart pounding. The hallway outside was dark. The tap came again, this time closer. From the front door of the rectory, he opened it slowly. No one there, only an envelope on the ground, weighted by a stone. No address, no stamp. Just his name, Father T. Delaney. He brought it inside, hands shaking. Inside the envelope, a photo, black and white, faded. It showed the interior of St. Harlan's Church. The view was from the altar, looking down the aisle. Every pew was empty, except one, the 11th pew on the left. A family of 5, seated neatly, heads bowed, and in the back corner of the frame, almost invisible in the shadows, a 6th figure, standing, facing the camera, looking directly at him. Present day. St. Harlan's Church Archives, lower level. The basement of St. Harlan's was built like a tomb. Stone walls, narrow corridors, a faint dripping sound in the far corner where a pipe had always leaked and no one had ever fixed it. Father Delaney walked slowly, lantern in one hand, the black and white photograph in the other. He couldn't stop looking at it. The family seated in the 11th pew. William, Margaret, Elijah, Samuel, and little Sarah, each frozen in prayer. But it was the 6th figure that pulled his gaze. The grainy shadow standing in the far aisle near the rear exit, almost obscured. No face, no name, but the posture was wrong. Not bowed in prayer, not seated in reverence, just watching, waiting. He descended the steps into the old archive vault. This was where music sheets, vestments, and ledgers had been stored before digital record-keeping made such places obsolete. Dust lay on everything like snowfall. The air was thick with mildew and something sweeter, like rotted fruit or old perfume. The choir files were kept in a locked cabinet. He pried it open with a small crowbar. The lock had rusted decades ago. Inside, hundreds of sheet music folders labeled by liturgical season, Advent, Lent, Easter, Ordinary Time. He pulled one labeled Seasonal Hymns, 1960s to 1973. Inside, music sheets, notes, practice logs, choir rosters, and something else, a cassette tape, labeled in faded blue ink. March 4th, final rehearsal, Sister Agnes recording. Delaney stared at it. The tape was old, fragile, but playable. He rushed upstairs, back to the rectory where he'd seen an ancient cassette deck kept in the sacristy storage box, a relic used for audio homilies in the 90s. He slid the tape in, pressed play. Static. Then, voices. A woman, gentle but firm. All right, let's take it again from the top. Page 237. Focus on the timing, please, Elijah. The choir began singing. It was the McKenna boy, his voice clear, controlled. The mother joined, then the father, then the younger children. Soft, still learning. Delaney listened, heart tightening. It was beautiful, haunting. And as the final verse came, the harmony began to shift. Notes collided. Not wrong, but different. Sharper, almost ancient, a hum beneath the melody. Then a voice not on the roster. Female, grown, singing a counter-harmony that didn't belong. It rose beneath the final line. Here's my heart, Lord. Take and seal it for thy courts above. Then silence. The tape didn't click off. It just stopped. No rewind, no end. Just a cut. Delaney hit rewind. Pressed play again. The ending was the same. Seal it for thy courts above. Then silence. He pressed pause. Closed his eyes. It was a choir rehearsal. Nothing more. But he knew that was a lie, because one of the voices on the tape didn't belong to any McKenna. It belonged to someone else. And he'd heard it before. In the chamber below, the girl. She was on the tape, 50 years ago, singing a harmony that didn't exist in the written music. He opened the hymnal again, the one left on the bench underground. Still blank, no notes, no words. Only a faint indentation where the ink once was, as if it had been sung out of the page. Present day, St. Harlan's Church, 1:06 a.m. It was just past 1 in the morning when Father Delaney unlocked the side door of the church and stepped into the nave. The wind had died. The woods were silent. Only the steady tick of the old sacristy clock accompanied him. He didn't bring the lantern this time. He wanted the dark. He needed it. The confessional stood near the rear, shadowed by the archways and the fading light of a single sanctuary candle still burning beside the altar. It flickered as if agitated, like it didn't want to be awake either. Delaney slid open the screen on the priest's side and sat inside the booth. The air smelled of varnish and ash. Faint incense still clung to the wood, as if the past clung to everything here. He rested his hands on his knees and stared at the dark screen between himself and the other side. The side meant for the penitent. No one was there. But still, he whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." His voice sounded small inside the box. "It has been... I don't know how long since my last confession. I have doubts. I have questions. I've heard hymns from broken instruments. I've seen a child who died before I entered seminary. I've read names that disappeared from the registry. I've found shoes that never decayed. And I fear I no longer know what is real." Silence, the kind that felt aware. He went on, "I'm not sure if this is divine, or something else. I came to close a file, Lord, not to open a door." The floor creaked. Delaney's breath caught. He peered through the mesh screen. The other side of the confessional was still empty, but the door was open. He reached forward and gently closed it, heart pounding. A beat passed, then a voice, software female, whispering from the other side. They didn't mean to stay. Delaney froze. He leaned closer. "What did you say?" The voice did not repeat itself, but it continued. It was the song. The song was too perfect. When voices align with faith and grief, sometimes the veil does not close. "Sarah?" Delaney whispered. "They didn't mean to stay," she said again. But once they were heard, they couldn't be unheard. Delaney stood suddenly, heart hammering. He opened the booth door. The other side was empty. He turned, scanning the dark church. No one there, but a sound echoed faintly down the nave. The creak of the 11th pew. The sanctuary was cold again. The kind of cold that wasn't just temperature, but presence. Something in the bones of the church was awake. Father Delaney stepped out of the confessional, heart pounding, breath unsteady. The voice, Sarah's, still echoed in his ears like a note left ringing too long on a piano key. Her words weren't just strange, they were intentional, like a warning, or an invitation. He turned down the nave, eyes locked on the 11th pew. It was still empty, but the book was back, the hymnal, open again, page 237. He moved slowly now, each step deliberate, each breath sounding too loud in the sacred silence. As he reached the pew, he felt it before he saw her, a shadow in the side aisle. He turned. There, a little girl standing halfway down the length of the church, between the votive candles and the exit door. White dress, barefoot. She wasn't facing him. She stood still, arms by her sides, head slightly tilted like she was listening to something only she could hear. "Sarah," Delaney said softly. Her head didn't move, but she spoke. "You're not the first to come looking." "Looking for what?" "For the ones who stayed." "What does that mean?" She turned slowly, and for the first time, he saw her face clearly. Pale, eyes too old. A line of dried red down one cheek. Not blood, but wax. As though she'd been crying melted candlelight. She stepped forward. Her footsteps made no sound. "They sang the hymn to remember," she said, "but remembering is dangerous when the church forgets." Delaney's mouth was dry. "Who forgot?" "The ones who heard it," she said. "The ones who walked away and pretended they didn't hear the last note." She stopped at the edge of the pews, just a few feet from him now. "It's not about death," she whispered. "It's about silence. When the voice of faith is too strong, silence becomes afraid. So it takes what it fears." Delaney swallowed hard. "Did it take your family?" She looked down. "It took the sound. We stayed to hold it, but it's too heavy now." Suddenly her eyes lifted, past him, to the altar, and she was gone again, like dust blown off a candle flame. Delaney turned. The sanctuary doors were swinging open on their own. No wind, no footsteps, just welcoming. The bell rang once. High above, the tower creaked. "Come, O fount of every blessing." He didn't sing, but the church did. From nowhere and everywhere, the notes whispered through the rafters. A harmony with no voice, just breathe and memory. The latter groaned under Father Delaney's weight. Each rung a hymn of protest against time. He hadn't climbed it in years. Most hadn't since the mid-'80s when the parish deemed the tower unsafe and unnecessary. And yet, the bell had rung. Twice now. Unbidden, unmanned. The narrow hatch to the bell loft creaked open as he pushed it, lantern swinging from his belt, casting dancing shadows onto the wooden slats above. The air inside was stale and bitter. Dust hung thick, floating like slow snowfall. Pigeons once lived here, but no feathers remained, no droppings. Just stillness and silence and the bell. She hung in the center of the chamber like an enormous, slumbering sentinel. Ancient, greened with age and forgotten weather. Her chain, long since rusted through, should have silenced her. But she had rung. Delaney approached cautiously. The bell's surface was pitted and worn. Etched into the bronze was a phrase in Latin, "Vox non desinit." The voice does not end. He reached up and touched it. Warm. Not from sun. From within. He stepped around it and stopped. At the base of the bell platform, tucked into the corner beneath a crossbeam, was a child's coat. Folded. Perfectly. With a tag sewn into the collar, S. McKenna. Delaney's stomach turned. And beside it, a small pile of candle stubs, mostly red, as if someone had been keeping vigil up here. Then came the sound. A faint clink. Metal. hollow, from within the bell. He stepped onto the platform and peered beneath the great mouth of the bronze giant. Something dangled inside. He reached up, fingers brushing it. A rosary. Old, wooden, its cord fraying with age. One of the beads was missing, another had been burned. He pulled it down slowly, and then the bell rang. Loud, blinding. Delaney stumbled backward, ears screaming. The lantern fell, shattering below in the loft. He clutched the rosary to his chest, heart thundering, but the bell had not moved. Not visibly. The clapper still hung, motionless. Yet the sound echoed, not away from him, but toward him. The tower vibrated with it, and behind the sound, whispers. Too many to count. Overlapping, pleading. We stayed. We stayed. We stayed. He collapsed to his knees, covering his ears, praying aloud, and just as suddenly, silence. Only the ticking of dust falling. Only the memory of sound. He opened his eyes. There, scrawled into the floor beside him, were 5 names, etched by hand into the wood. William, Margaret, Elijah, Samuel, Sarah, and one more beneath them, carved in smaller, less steady script. Thy will be done, Father. Delaney's hands were still shaking when he returned to the rectory. The rosary hung heavy in his pocket, its wooden beads warm against his leg, as though they remembered the bell's cry, and the name spoken through it. He hadn't slept in more than a day now. He didn't feel tired, only watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was knowledge. The church remembered him now, and he remembered it back. He sat at the old desk, lit a fresh candle, and retrieved the parish ledger again. He needed proof. Something physical, something that tied what he'd seen and what he feared to reality. What he found wasn't in the book. It was behind it. The ledger had scraped against the back panel of the cabinet, catching on a warped piece of wood. When Delaney reached to adjust it, the panel popped free, revealing a narrow hollow behind the desk wall. Inside were letters, dozens, all sealed, all yellowed with age, and all addressed to one man, Father Harold Grayson, confidential. Some were unopened. Others had been torn hastily and then restuffed into their envelopes. Each carried the same tone, desperate, urgent, silenced. Delaney began to read. April 19th, 1951. Father Grayson, you asked us not to speak of the children who went missing at the spring choir retreat, but we feel this is a mistake. Nothing about that day was natural. The forest swallowed sound. The girls were singing and then gone. You said we must not disturb the diocese with superstition, but this is not superstition, it's truth. The bell rang twice before they vanished, the same as it did for the McKennas. Delaney stopped, breath caught. The McKennas hadn't been the first. He read on. October 3rd, 1962. They say not to reopen the crypt beneath the altar, that it was sealed in 1899 after the fire, but we can still hear footsteps above it, even when the church is empty. Sister Agatha says the sound is the Lord walking. I think it's the ones left behind. They sing when no one is there to listen. February 9th, 1973. Dear Harold, we must cancel the hymn Elijah's been working on. I've heard it. It's too close, too aligned. I fear if they sing it, something old will wake again. I know how you feel about these things, but the last time this harmony emerged, it took people, not bodies, people. We must not sing the final verse. Please, do not let it happen again. R. Delaney stared at the last letter, heart pounding. A month before the McKennas vanished. A warning. Ignored. And it wasn't just the hymn. It was the arrangement, the harmony. When the voices aligned just right, something responded. Something that didn't belong to the living. Or perhaps had once. Delaney looked toward the church beyond the window. The candle flickered. He realized the choir loft hadn't been searched, not fully, and if the records were right, there were still more voices unaccounted for. The stairs to the choir loft moaned like an old confession, slow, reluctant, warning with every step. Father Delaney ascended with the rosary in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He no longer trusted the lantern's flickering glow. The darkness here was less forgiving now, more aware. Each footfall sent dust spiraling into the stale air, and with it came the scent of old wood, forgotten songbooks, and mildew soaked into memory. The loft had once been full of life. Children sang here. Women in lace veils held candles. Harmonies rose into the rafters like prayers without doubt. Now silence sat like an intruder. The choir benches were warped with age. Sheet music still lay where it had been abandoned. One page curled upward, showing only a single word written in ink at the top. "Remember." Delaney crouched beside the old reel-to-reel player tucked under a storage cloth at the rear of the loft. He hadn't seen it before, not during cleanup, not in the inventory logs. Dust coated its surface, but it hadn't rested long. The outline on the cloth was too fresh, and there was a tape already loaded. He pressed play. The reel spun, and a voice came through, but it wasn't Father Grayson's, or any voice Delaney recognized. It was male, slow, gentle. But there was an edge beneath the calm. Something not quite right, like a lullaby sung just slightly off key. "Dear flock, welcome to the lost hour." Static. Then, "You've sung it, haven't you?" The hymn that calls backward. Not forward, not heavenward, but inward. Delaney froze. The audio was clean. Too clean for a decades-old recording. The voice continued. "It begins with faith. It ends with remembering. And between those lies the space that opens." "You were told not to sing it," the voice whispered. "But you did. You let the voices align. And now they stay. Forever." A new sound emerged. A child humming. Faint, but nearby. Delaney stood suddenly scanning the loft. Nothing moved. The hum grew louder. More voices joined it. 2, 3, 5. Children, the hymn. "Come, O fount of every blessing." But the arrangement was wrong. The key shifted. The tempo slowed. It became a dirge. The recording popped and hissed. Then silence. Delaney reached to rewind, and the reel spun backward on its own, fast, uncontrolled, until it snapped. The tape flailed wildly, a black ribbon coiling through the air like a snake. Delaney stumbled backward. Then something knocked behind him. He turned. A wooden door in the back of the loft, previously sealed shut with nails, now ajar. A pale light flickered inside. He stepped toward it. The space beyond was not a storage room. It was a small chamber, circular, like a baptismal rotunda, but far too high in the church's eaves. Candles ringed the walls, and in the center, a pew. Just one, the 11th, alone, waiting. He stepped closer. On the seat lay a folded bulletin. St. Harlan's, March 4th, 1973. He turned it over. On the back, handwritten in red ink, "Do not sing the last verse. If you finish it, the door closes behind you." The air in the sacristy felt thicker now. It wasn't just age or dust. It was presence. The way a room feels when someone has just left or is about to arrive. Father Delaney moved slowly. He carried the torn bulletin with him, the one from 1973. The ink had smeared slightly, leaving a faint red shadow of the final words. "If you finish it, the door closes behind you." He didn't know what door it meant, but something inside him already did. He opened the old baptismal registry, tucked between stacks of forgotten altar linens and the broken reliquary cabinet. The book hadn't been touched in decades. The spine cracked as he turned the cover. Each baptism was recorded carefully, a name, a date, a verse of scripture. Most included a small Polaroid stapled beside the entry, as was the custom in the 60s and early 70s. Faded smiles, damp curls, tiny lace garments. Until he reached the McKenna entry. It was for Sarah, dated April 14th, 1967. The photo was still attached, but unlike the others, it had bled. A thin red stain had bloomed across the paper, spreading from the bottom edge like something seeping upward instead of dripping down. The image was distorted. He pulled it close. The baby was there, the parents smiling. Elijah, just a boy, held the candle. But behind them, in the shadows of the altar, a tall figure stood. Too tall, head bowed, arms crossed, faceless. The same presence that had watched from the edge of the photo taken in the nave. The sixth figure. It hadn't just watched them go. It had been with them all along. Delaney tried to peel the photo back to see if anything was written underneath. As he did, the staple caught his finger. A bead of blood welled at the tip. He pulled back, wincing. The blood fell onto the registry page, and the page moved. The ink began to shift, not smudge, but rewrite itself. Sarah's baptismal verse, originally Psalm 139, "For you formed my inward parts," blurred and then rewrote into a single phrase, "She never left." Delaney stumbled backward, hand clutched against his chest. He looked down. The red ink from the bulletin matched his blood exactly. Same tone, same texture, same purpose. He didn't know, but something inside this church, something beneath it, was waking more with each step he took, and he was no longer sure if he was chasing the truth or being led to it. The sanctuary was silent, not empty, just silent. Like the moments after a bell has stopped ringing, but the vibration still lingers in the bones. Father Delaney stood at the back of the nave, just inside the main doors. It was just past midnight. He hadn't planned to return. Not yet. But the hymnal had appeared again. On the pew, open, page 237, as always. He stepped forward, passing the cold stone holy water font, its surface untouched for decades. He dipped 2 fingers out of habit. The water was warm. He blinked. In the far pews ahead, the candles were lit, and the organ began to play. Not loudly, not theatrically, just softly, like someone at practice. He froze, because there was no one at the organ, no one he could see. Yet the chords were perfect, slower, measured, not quite a hymn. More like a prelude, a waiting. He took a step forward, and then he saw them. Not shadows, not ghosts, people. The pews were filled, men in suits, women in veils, children leaning sleepily against their mothers. Their clothes were wrong, old, faded wool, lace gloves, jackets 2 sizes too large. 1973, but not memories. They were here. He stepped forward again, blinking, and the light changed. The walls brightened, warmed by candlelight that hadn't been lit in years. The banners returned. Lenten purple draped across the altar. The communion rail stood whole again. The cracked marble of the sanctuary floor was suddenly unbroken. He turned back. The doors behind him were gone. Only stone, seamless, as though he had always been here. The organ music swelled, and a Father Harold Grayson stepped out from the sacristy, younger than Delaney had ever seen him. Vestments perfect, voice clear. In the name of the Father, Grayson began. The congregation responded as one, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Delaney wanted to move, to speak, to stop it, but he couldn't. His legs didn't respond. He was part of it now, a member of the midnight mass that never ended. The homily was short. The candles flickered, but never went out. And then it began. "Please turn to hymn number 237, Father Grayson said, smiling. We will sing the final hymn together, one last time." The McKennas stood in unison, all five, and Sarah turned, not to the priest, but to Delaney. She saw him. She recognized him. "You're early," she said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "It's not done yet." "What's not?" She didn't answer. She turned her head, and the congregation began to sing, "Come, O fount of every blessing." The sound filled the nave, but beneath it, just like before, there was something else, a second melody, a counter hymn, and this time, Delaney knew the words. They were rising from his own throat, unbidden, unstoppable. He sang, and the church listened, and something opened. A tremor passed through the floor. Stone flexed like muscle. The stained glass windows began to glow, not with light, but with motion. The saints inside them shifted, blinked. One reached forward, hand pressed to the inside of the glass, as though trying to get out. Delaney gasped, the hymn faltering on his lips. The moment broke, and he was alone, back in the present. Dust. Silence. Cracked marble again. Empty pews, except for one, the 11th, and on it, a final page torn from the hymnal, with 5 names written in red ink. One space left blank. At the bottom, "When the song finishes, so do we." He brought no lantern this time. Only the torn page from the hymnal. Only the final name left blank. Only silence, echoing louder than footsteps. The entrance to the crypt had once been sealed behind the altar, hidden under layers of wood, stone, and sacramental history. But that night, Father Delaney found it open, waiting. The old brass handle was warm. The stairwell beyond was lit by nothing, yet it wasn't dark. Light seemed to bleed in from the cracks in memory itself. As he descended, the air grew still, not cold, not humid, just absent, as though breath didn't belong here. He reached the bottom. The chamber was as he remembered it, curved, stone-lined, impossible in size. But something had changed. The bench was gone. In its place were 5 chairs, arranged in a half circle, each faced inward toward a 6th, empty. On the 5th sat the McKennas, not corpses, not apparitions, but fixed, as if caught in a moment the world forgot. Their eyes were open, peaceful. They didn't look at him. They looked at the center, the 6th chair, where the torn hymn page now fluttered. They stayed to hold the note, came a voice behind him. He turned. Sarah. She hadn't aged. Still barefoot, still solemn, still sad. "They sang it too well," she whispered. "Too true. That note didn't go up. It went inward, and it found a space." Delaney stepped toward the circle. The McKennas did not move. "They've been here ever since," Sarah said. "Not dead, not alive, just holding the song, so no one else has to." Delaney looked at the empty chair. "And if someone finishes it?" She didn't answer. But she stepped into the circle. Kneeling beside her mother's chair, she placed a hand over Margaret's folded fingers, still clutching a rosary worn down by touch. "It gets louder." A sound emerged then, soft, low, like breath drawn over the edge of glass. It came from below the stone, from inside it, the sound of hundreds of voices, layered, stacked, not singing, not crying, holding. Delaney reached for the torn page. It lifted into his hand like paper in a dream. He stared at the final bar. One line of music. One single, suspended note. Unfinished. He looked at Sarah. She nodded once. "If you don't finish it, someone else will." His lips parted, and he began to sing. "Come, O fount of every blessing." Father Delaney's voice echoed through the stone chamber, soft and unsure at first. The McKennas did not move, but the atmosphere shifted. The air grew tighter, as if time itself had paused to listen. Sarah stood beside the 6th chair, hands folded, Her eyes closed. Tune my heart to sing thy grace. The note rose, and the ground responded. A distant rumble trembled through the walls. Faint at first, like thunder on the edge of memory. Then came the others. Voices, stacking. Layered harmonies rose from the stone, from beneath it, from within it. A swelling chorus not heard in 50 years, not meant to be heard. Delaney's voice cracked, but he kept singing, because if he stopped now, someone else would have to finish. Streams of mercy never ceasing. The McKennas joined him, one by one, mouths opening, eyes never blinking, not blank, not lifeless, just present, just remembering. Call for songs of loudest praise. The sixth chair, still empty, began to shimmer, not visibly, not with light, but with memory, like the shape of someone you haven't seen in years, forming from air. Sarah stepped into it. The note reached its final phrase. Seal it for thy courts above. Delaney felt it. The completion. The moment when the sound no longer echoed, because it belonged exactly where it landed. And when it ended, so did the choir. All at once. No sound, no breath. The McKennas were still, their mouths closed, their hands rested gently in their laps. Sarah turned to Delaney, not smiling, but not afraid. You closed it, she said. That's all we needed. The walls around them didn't shake. They exhaled. The pressure lifted. The silence changed. No longer thick, no longer hungry, just silence. Sarah stepped toward him. Her bare feet left no prints on the stone. Thank you, she said. What happens now? She paused. You forget. What? So others don't have to. She reached out, touched his temple, and Delaney's eyes blurred. Father Thomas Delaney turned the key in his office door. The room was quiet, warm. The smell of coffee lingered from the morning. He sat at his desk and opened his calendar. He'd meant to follow up on the old transfer from St. Harlan's, some church being decommissioned years ago. But the folder was blank. No name, no history. He blinked. Strange. He thought, never mind. Outside, the choir was rehearsing. Come, O fount of every blessing. He smiled, closed his eyes, and didn't remember why the melody brought tears. Epilogue, St. Harlan's Church. Abandoned. The church still stands. Vines crawl up the old bell tower. The pews are coated in dust. The altar leans forward slightly, as though tired. But the 11th pew is always clean. The hymnal sits open. Page 237. Untouched, waiting, and sometimes, when the wind comes through just right, a note rings through the air. Software clear, unfinished.